Hi everyone, it's Kat from Williams OT.
G'day everybody, Brad Williams here, CEO of Williams OT, and this is another video in our What About Wheelchairs video series about wheelchairs and what goes into a wheelchair assessment, what goes into wheelchair decision making that you might have to do, what goes into the different components of a wheelchair to get the best fit for you as a wheelchair user.
Yep.
And Kat, I'm a little bit nervous about what's about to happen here today because this is something that people need to understand when it comes to a wheelchair assessment, because it's not just picking a wheelchair off the shelf. We don't just shove someone in a wheelchair and measure from there, do we?
No, it's in a funny way, it's a little bit like fitting you. I like to say it's a bit like going to the tailor and getting a tailor-made suit. You need a chair that fits your body, that fits what you need it to do as well. So there's a lot of planning involved.
The first thing that pops into my head in regards to a tailor-made suit is somebody with a measuring tape and measuring the inside of my groin and doing chalk marks up and down my leg. Is that what's going to happen?
I won't do chalk marks, but I do take lots of measurements and lots of photos too.
So it's important that people know the process that's going to happen, so they understand why it's important,
why we do it,
but also what might actually happen in that initial assessment.
Exactly.
So there's no hidden agendas, there's nothing like that. It's all about getting the best fit for the wheelchair.
Exactly. So step one of the process for talking about a new wheelchair is we literally have a conversation with our clients about what their priorities are. If they're an existing wheelchair user, they often come with a wealth of experience about what works for them, what hasn't worked for them in the past, what they definitely don't want to do in their new chair, as in the design type and things like that. It might be related to how heavy they're finding their current chair. So that will give me some pointers about what we're leaning towards. But then we also need a whole lot of information about your lifestyle, about your condition, whether it's likely to change in the next 5 to 10 years, but also where you're planning to use the chair. Is it mainly for indoors, outdoors? Do you want it to do everything? There's a lot involved.
There's a big difference if I want to use my wheelchair for going back to work in a corporate office versus I want to go fishing every day.
Yes, there's a lot of different
to consider there. But that's more about the wheelchair aspects of it all. But we've got to make sure that I don't fall out of the chair. If I'm in a corporate office, I might be working 8 hours a day. If I go fishing, I might go fishing for 12 hours. I don't know, but whatever it might be. We've got to consider all of those little components about comfort and size and those kind of things. So what we're doing today is we're going through how to assess the comfort side of things.
The comfort and
postural.
And postural support. But so step one, as I said before, is literally just a conversation. Then we will make a different time to do the mat assessment, the mechanical assessment tool, which generally is going to involve coming to our clinic. Today we're at Extra Care, thanks to Extra Care for hosting us today. But generally we will do this assessment in our Myland clinic, where we have a clip a bit like this one. And your OT will assess your body dimensions as well as your joint range of movement, as well as your abilities and postural considerations, so your hips and your spinal alignment as well.
So it doesn't really matter whether I've got some movement or literally no movement from the waist down or even higher. This needs to be done to make sure that it's the same process.
It's the same process. So what I thought I'd go through just quickly, we're not going to go so much through the postural assessment part of things today, but what we're going to do is just talk about the basic dimensions and why it's relevant compared to that wheelchair next to Brad. So for Brad, if I was measuring Brad up for a chair, I would I generally like to start from the ground up. So what I'll do is get you nice and comfortable on the plinth, sitting there like this. If you need some support,
Yeah, if I've got no postural control.
We would have a support person next to you at the time, or support behind your back.
Yep.
Now, what I generally like to do, there's some basic measurements we need to work through and record. So I will look at things like the lower leg length,
Yep.
so from the heel to the back of the knee. I also look at depth of the foot, which tells me how the dimensions of the foot plate that we're looking for. The reason why lower leg length is relevant is we need to think about the seat height of the wheelchair, but also where we're positioning the foot plate.
Yeah, so the length of this area here,
Yeah.
isn't it? Now,
But
if
also,
Yep.
sorry, just one thought with that. Also, if you're wanting a particular cushion that we know is like 2 or 3 inches high, we need to take that into account when we're planning the height of the chair.
So the height from the base here of the wheelchair, you're going to add another cushion on top of that. It's going to be completely different.
Okay, so next we look at your upper leg length. So I'll just be measuring from behind the knee to the rearmost point behind Brad's bottom back here, and that's the back point. It's not necessarily exactly to the end of his seat. I like to put something flat behind the person's lower back, so I get your exact,
I can be leaning forward.
Exactly.
I could have a postural tilt of some sort somewhere. Like you've mentioned in other videos, I could have really tight hamstrings or tight back, and I might be on this plinth a little bit more rigid, more out like that, and all of that means that we've got to find a position that I'm comfortable in. It'd be no good you forcing my leg back to fit the wheelchair and pushing my back forward if, 5 minutes down the track I'm actually going to start
leaning back,
pushing back out again.
Yeah. So one thing I forgot to mention before is that if you're already in a wheelchair when you come into the clinic to see us, we will have a look at your posture and the fit of your existing chair, because often that will give me a few little pointers as to what we're aiming to improve.
Sometimes it can be a lot of pointers. You see some people coming into the clinic.
Oh my goodness, that does not work for them.
And they've had a wheelchair prescribed to them.
Or they have really long legs like Brad does here, and there's no support for them.
And they're sitting in their wheelchair like this, and they're like in a recliner. If I go over a bump, I'm going to slide out. Some people come in
some scary things,
and their knees are up here like this, like right up against their chest. Really, really high, which means that all the pressure is going back into the bottom. The ITs, you might hear about ITs, ischial tuberosities. I remembered something from anatomy school. The little bony bits of your pelvis that sit down really, really low. But some people are really hunched over and in a really bad posture, and some people are out, almost falling out of their chairs.
So that's
coming into the clinic in their wheelchair.
So that can be a telltale sign of, right, we need to work on this, this and this. So we mentally record that. So then when we get to this stage, we've measured Brad's leg length. That's going to dictate the length of the seat. Generally we like to allow for about 2 or 3 fingers width behind the knee crease. And then we want the seat to start from there. That prevents any rubbing behind the knees.
I know myself that I'm really long in my calf.
You do have really long legs.
Really long calves, but I'm actually much shorter in my thigh, which, I don't know, I'm pretty peculiar. But this is much longer than this bit here. So when I sat in this hybrid chair that we were videoing about earlier, that was all wrong for me. It was too long in the thigh and too short in the calf area. So it makes a massive difference to get these measurements right.
Okay, so the other thing to mention as well, when we take these measurements, quite often I will take photos and actually record these measurements on the photos. It's just part of the process. Those photos we actually use in your application for funding. So we keep them securely, but there is a reason why we take those, because we can demonstrate exactly what your needs are. The picture tells 1,000 words.
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah.
Sure does. Now what about, so you've talked about the measurement from bottom to knee, which is, what's that one called? Seat depth.
Yeah.
You've talked about leg length in regards to the calf, and that's for the hangers and the foot plate. And you've talked about measurements of the foot for the actual foot plate. What about from here up then? So what do we need to consider from here?
At this point, quite often our plinth will be pulled a little bit away from behind the wall.
Yeah, I can actually.
Yeah, so Brad's just going to shuffle forward for me a tiny bit. Yep. So there's a couple of little tools that I like to use. First of all, we need to look at Brad's hip width to make sure that the wheelchair is going to be a nice snug fit, and it's not going to be too snug or too big and he's going to move around a lot over the place.
Yep.
These measuring guides are fantastic because they tell me exactly the widest point of the hips.
Now you don't need to hold your arms like this when you come in for an assessment. I'm just trying to get my arms out of the way for
just like this.
For video purposes.
I'm just measuring behind the hips like this. So the other thing we need to look at for the purpose of the height of the backrest, we touched on this in another video, is I need to look at Brad's shoulder blade as well. The easiest way to do that, I'm going to get Brad to tuck his hand behind his back, a bit like he's tucking in a shirt, and that makes his shoulder blade pop out the base of it. Right?
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I measure the lowest point of his shoulder blade like this. So that tells me that is the top part. Just below that is where I want to sit that backrest to give him good back support. Too high and his shoulders are going to be restricted and he won't be able to push. Too low and his torso is going to feel really unsupported.
So it's going to happen that the OT is going to invade your personal space. So there's no way around it.
It is a bit of a close proximity thing, and that's why we're doing this video, just to give you a few explanations why we do what we do. I do explain it on the day, but this helps too. So while we're here behind, quite often I will take another photo just to record these measurements. I'm also looking at your spinal alignment while you're sitting on a firm surface. As what happens is, if these are somebody's hips, as soon as somebody who has a slight pelvic obliquity, like Brad's sitting now, as soon as that is on a firm surface, what happens is the spine above it will try and compensate. So I'm also looking at spinal alignment while you're sitting like this, to see if there's anything we can do to correct. I'm just going to give Brad a bit of a hug behind like this, by putting some extra lateral supports in.
This type of detachable modular backrest to give you more of that lateral support.
So if Brad was having trouble sitting upright, then I'd probably look for a low backrest like that, that sort of hugged him underneath where the shoulder blades are, just underneath, to try and stabilise his torso like that. So while I'm here, just in terms of measurements, I'll measure the base of the shoulder blade. I'm also going to measure to the top of the shoulder as well. This is more relevant for higher backrest, particularly as you move towards a powered chair. What I also look at while I'm side on is I will measure to the top of the head as well from a firm seat.
Now Kat, I know that I've got terrible posture when I sit. I am very rounded, and I'm trying to hold up now, but I know that for good posture I should be sitting up nice and tall with a nice straight spine. But I know
that you don't sit like that all the time.
That I sit like this. I sit a very C curve, and it's something that.
So what happens in terms of postural support, and this we'll touch on in another video, everything in terms of your posture comes from your pelvis and your hips. So that's where we start with the cushion. Once we've stabilised your pelvis as neutral as possible, particularly with tilt, people who tend to slouch a bit like Brad was doing before, their pelvis is actually tilted forwards like this. So that tends to encourage a C spine.
I can feel it. Now that we're talking about it, I can feel it. I can.
I've slouch. It's the TV slouch.
I teeth, the bottom of my pelvis is in this hard cushion. This is very firm, and because I am sitting on those bony bits, they get uncomfy.
Yeah.
So I kind of recline
take
off
the
of
weight
them
off
and,
it,
and sit
yeah.
on the cushy bit of my floor.
Yeah. So what happens when you do that, when you roll backwards onto the cushy bit of your bottom, the muscle there, and the tissue there, what happens if you keep that posture for an extended amount of time and you don't shift your position? That's where pressure issues start.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to avoid.
But if we get a good cushion, I might be able to sit up on those bony bits and not feel the pressure, and then all of a sudden my posture is better.
Then your posture's better. And then we look at your back support as well to choose the backrest that is going to be right for your postural needs. But also encourage good shoulder movement as well if you're propelling a manual chair.
I can feel it now.
And now it's sitting really upright.
But now what I can feel now is that I need more support under my legs and I need my knees higher.
Yeah, because you're sitting on the edge for me.
So all of these memeasurements are really important to get right.
Yeah.
So when we sit in that chair, you don't want to be going into a recline, bad posture. So right now I can feel when I sit in this position, all my lungs are being compressed, or my stomach's being compressed. All of those things are internally are being restricted.
If we know that you have a tendency to tilt your pelvis, like we were doing just then, that's what we call posterior tilt. So if we know there's a tendency for that, there are things we can do with the cushion, but we can also do things to open up the angle of the hips. With the backrest canes, we can kick it back a little bit to encourage you to sit upright and to have contact with that backrest.
I've gone up on my toes now.
Yeah.
I can feel it now that I'm tuning into what you're assessing for. I can feel what I'm doing with my body to try and get in the right position, which is what you're going to try and do with the wheelchair based on these measurements.
Yeah. But the other thing to think about is that it is really relevant for all of these wheelchairs are weight tested. So one of the uncomfortable things, and it's quite personal, but we have to ask people what their current body weight is. We also need to look at their height. But the reason the weight is relevant is because all of these wheelchairs have a safe working load, and we need to be 10% lower than that top level. And that is for crash testing, that is for safety standards, and it's also to achieve the funding, because we need to make sure that a custom piece of equipment like this is going to meet your needs for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so you might ask about weight fluctuations as well.
Yeah.
And
So I know it's
lost weight
personal,
or whether they've gained weight.
but it is important.
I can feel a massive difference just when you talk about trying to achieve different measurements, trying to achieve different lengths here and there, and what difference that makes.
What we do is the assessment I was talking about back at our clinic. We get you to have a lie down, and we look at the range of movement and your hip positioning and your spinal positioning when you're lying down. And it's a bit like a physio assessment or something like that. I go through range of movement of the ankles, the knees, the hips, the whole bit. I'll stretch your legs around and all of that. But it's very gently done, and I explain what I'm doing along the way.
Excellent. Just as we wind this one up, another shout out to Extra Care that are hosting us today with all of their equipment, with their wheelchairs, their plinth, even their tape measure, I think. But anyway, thank you very much, Extra Care, for hosting us today, bringing this series to you. We're bringing out a video that builds on knowledge and information so you can come informed to your assessments, so we can get the right wheelchair for you.
Yeah, and as always, if you have any particular questions, or you really think, if this video has made you think, oh, actually, I think I do need a replacement chair or something, get in touch with our office. Jump on our website, there's a referral form there, you can refer yourself, and we'd be really happy to meet with you.